The entire town watched as Evelyn Carter's own father called her worthless trash in front of everyone, then sold her like cattle to a stranger and rode away laughing. She stood there in her ruined silk dress, bleeding feet, and something inside her shattered. But what happened next? That fragile society girl they all mocked? She became the one person this brutal frontier couldn't survive without. This is her story. Stick with me until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. The stagecoach kicked up clouds of dust that settled over everything like a burial shroud. Evelyn Carter stepped down onto the wooden platform, her legs shaking so badly she nearly fell. The heat hit her first, a suffocating wall of it that made her expensive corset feel like an iron cage crushing her ribs. Then came the stares. Everyone in the pathetic excuse for a town had stopped what they were doing to watch her. Men leaning against the saloon porch. Women hanging laundry. Even the blacksmith had paused mid-swing, hammer frozen in the air. They weren't just looking, they were grinning. Some were outright laughing. Evelyn's face burned hotter than the desert sun. She knew exactly what they saw. A tall, stick-thin city girl drowning in layers of silk and lace that probably cost more than most of these people made in a year. Her skin was paper white from years spent indoors at social functions she'd always been too awkward to enjoy. Her hands were soft and useless. Her hair was styled in elaborate curls that were already wilting in the brutal heat. She looked ridiculous. She knew it, and they knew she knew it. "Well, would you look at that?" someone called out. "Like a show pony got lost on the way to the fair." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to climb back into that stagecoach and demand to be taken home. But there was no home anymore. Not really. Not after... "Evelyn." Her father's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Stop standing there like an imbecile. You're making a spectacle of yourself." She turned to see Richard Carter stepping down from the coach behind her, his expression twisted with the particular brand of disgust he reserved exclusively for his only daughter. He was a large man, successful in business, respected in Boston society. Everything he touched turned to gold, except her. "Father, She started, but he talked right over her. "Don't speak. You've embarrassed me enough for one lifetime." He brushed dust from his expensive coat, not even looking at her. "Where is he at?" A man emerged from the shadows near the livery stable. Evelyn's stomach dropped. He was massive, not fat, just built like something carved from mountain stone and left out in the weather too long. His face was all hard angles and sun-damaged skin. Dark hair hung past his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. His clothes were worn leather and rough cotton, stained with sweat and dirt and things she probably didn't want to identify. He moved like a predator, slow, deliberate, completely confident. When his eyes met hers, they were the cold gray of a winter sky. Empty. Uninterested. Like she was a piece of cargo he'd been hired to transport and nothing more. "Colt Maddox?" her father asked. The man gave a single nod. "Good. I'm Richard Carter. We spoke by telegram." Her father gestured at Evelyn like she was furniture. "This is her, as discussed." Evelyn's hands started trembling. This couldn't be happening. Her father had told her they were traveling west so she could take the air for her health, that it would be good for her constitution, that maybe the change of scenery would make her more marriageable. She'd believed him because she was stupid and desperate, and still holding on to the pathetic hope that somewhere deep down he actually cared about her. "She don't look like much," Colt said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "You said she was healthy." "She's healthy enough, just needs toughening up. Too much time indoors." Her father pulled an envelope from his coat. "This is the deed to the northern section, as agreed, 200 acres. And the bank draft for the additional sum." "Father?" Evelyn's voice came out small and frightened. "What's happening?" He didn't answer her, didn't even glance her direction. Colt took the envelope, checked its contents, then tucked it inside his jacket. "Appreciate the business." "Wait." Evelyn grabbed her father's arm. "What is this? What did you do?" Finally, he looked at her. And what she saw in his face made her blood run cold. Not anger, not even disgust, just tired relief. Like he was getting rid of something that had been weighing him down for years. "I'm solving a problem," he said. "You." The crowd had gone quiet now. Everyone was listening. Everyone would hear this. Everyone would know. I gave you every advantage, her father continued, his voice rising. The best education, the best clothes, every opportunity to make a decent match. And what did you do? You scared off every eligible bachelor in Boston with your nervous stammering and complete lack of social grace. You're 26 years old, Evelyn. 26. Do you know what people call you behind my back? The spinster Carter, the defective daughter, the girl too ugly and awkward to marry off. Each word landed like a physical blow. Evelyn felt her eyes starting to burn, but she refused to cry. Not here, not in front of all these strangers. I did my best, she whispered. Your best wasn't good enough. He was shouting now, playing to the audience. I can't keep supporting your failure forever, so I made arrangements. Mr. Maddox here needs help running his ranch. You need somewhere to be useful for once in your useless life. It's a fair trade. He gets land and money. I get rid of a burden. The silence that followed was devastating. Evelyn could feel dozens of eyes on her, drinking in her humiliation like it was entertainment. Someone giggled. Someone else muttered something she couldn't quite hear but knew was cruel. You're selling me, she said. Her voice sounded strange, distant, like property. Don't be dramatic. I'm giving you a chance to finally contribute something to the world. Try not to fail at this too. He turned back to Colt. She's your problem now. Do with her what you will. Before Evelyn could respond, before she could scream or cry or beg, her father climbed back into the stagecoach and rapped his cane against the roof. The driver snapped the reins, and just like that, Richard Carter rode away from his daughter without a single look back. Evelyn stood there in the choking dust, watching the only family she had disappear into the desert. Her whole body was shaking. She couldn't breathe. The corset was too tight, the heat too much, the humiliation too overwhelming. Can you ride? Colt's voice snapped her back to reality. She turned to find him standing beside a massive black horse, already saddling up. He wasn't looking at her, just checking straps and buckles like she wasn't even there. Yes, a little. I took lessons when I was... Don't care about lessons. Can you stay on a horse for 6 hours without falling off? 6 hours? Where are we going? My ranch, mountain territory. We need to leave now if we want to make it before dark. He swung up into the saddle with an ease that made it look effortless. Then he looked down at her, waiting. Evelyn glanced around desperately. The townspeople were still watching, still grinning, waiting to see what the pathetic city girl would do next. She had no money, no friends, no way to get home, even if there was a home to get back to. I'll need a horse, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Colt's expression didn't change. Can't spare one. You'll walk. Walk? In this heat? In these clothes? She gestured at her elaborate dress, the stupid heeled boots that were already pinching her feet. That's insane. Then stay here. He gathered his reins. Makes no difference to me. He meant it. She could see it in his face. He would ride away and leave her standing in this dusty hellhole without a second thought. And what would she do then? Beg these strangers for help? The same strangers who'd watched her father humiliate her and done nothing? Wait, she said quickly. I'll walk. Just, please don't leave me here. Something flickered across his face. Not quite pity, but maybe recognition of basic human desperation. He gave a short nod and started riding. Not fast, but not slow either. A steady pace that would cover ground. Evelyn lifted her skirts and followed. Within the first 10 minutes, she knew this was going to be hell. Her dress weighed at least 20 pounds with all the layers and petticoats. The fabric trapped heat against her skin until sweat was running down her back in rivers. Her corset made every breath a struggle. And her boots, those beautiful expensive leather boots with their fashionable heels, felt like they were lined with broken glass. Colt didn't slow down. Didn't check to see if she was keeping up. Just kept riding at that same steady pace while she struggled behind him, gasping for air and trying not to fall. The town disappeared behind them quickly. Soon there was nothing but desert in every direction, endless stretches of sand and scrub brush and rocks under a sun that felt like it was actively trying to kill her. The silence was oppressive, just the sound of the horse's hooves, her ragged breathing, and the rustle of her skirts dragging through the dirt. An hour in, she stumbled over a rock and went down hard on her hands and knees. Pain shot through her palms where the rough ground tore skin. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Colt kept riding. Please, she called out, her voice cracked. Just a moment. I need to rest. He stopped the horse, turned in the saddle to look back at her. His expression was completely neutral. We stop? We don't make the ranch before dark? Don't make it before dark. We sleep in the desert. Desert at night will kill you if the coyotes don't get you first. I just need a minute. No. He faced forward again. Keep up or get left behind. And he started riding. Evelyn wanted to scream, wanted to throw something at his broad, indifferent back. But she was pretty sure if she opened her mouth, only sobs would come out. So she pushed herself to her feet, ignored the blood on her palms, and kept walking. 2 hours in, the sole of her right boot came loose. She could feel it flapping with every step, rubbing a blister on her heel that quickly turned into an open wound. Every step was agony. She started limping, trying to favor her left foot, but that just made the left boot cut into her ankle until she was bleeding there too. Colt never looked back. 3 hours in, she fell again. This time she stayed down for almost a full minute, face pressed against the hot sand, wondering if dying here might actually be easier than taking another step. Her throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. The heat was making her dizzy. But somewhere deep in the haze of exhaustion and pain, a tiny spark of anger flickered to life. Her father had called her weak, too fragile to survive. This entire town had looked at her like she was a joke. And now this stranger, this man who'd been paid to take her, was treating her like disposable cargo, not worth the effort of basic human decency. They all expected her to fail, expected her to collapse crying in the desert and prove everything they believed about spoiled city girls who couldn't handle real life. Evelyn pushed herself up, wiped blood and sand from her face, and kept walking. 4 hours in, her right boot finally disintegrated completely. The sole came off entirely, leaving her foot exposed to the burning sand and sharp rocks. She couldn't help the small cry of pain that escaped when a stone cut deep into her arch. But she didn't stop, didn't call for help, just pulled off the useless boot, threw it aside, and kept moving. One foot bare and bleeding, the other still trapped in a boot that felt like an instrument of torture. Her dress was torn and filthy. Her carefully styled hair had come completely undone, hanging in sweat-soaked tangles around her face. She probably looked insane. She didn't care anymore. 5 hours in, the landscape started changing. The flat desert gave way to rocky hills, then steeper terrain. Colt guided his horse up a narrow trail that was barely visible between the rocks. Evelyn followed, using her hands to pull herself up the steeper sections. Her palms were raw and bleeding. Her nails broke. More cuts appeared on her arms and legs as she scraped against sharp stone. Still, she climbed. 6 hours in, or maybe it was 7, she'd lost track of time, Colt finally stopped. They'd reached a small plateau with a few scrubby trees providing minimal shade. In the distance, she could see mountains rising up against the darkening sky. Evelyn collapsed the moment she reached level ground. Every muscle in her body was screaming. Her feet felt like someone had taken a cheese grater to them. She couldn't feel her face anymore, probably sunburned so badly the nerve endings had given up. She heard Colt dismount, heard him moving around, doing something with his saddlebags, then footsteps approaching. A shadow fell across her. She forced her eyes open to find him standing over her, holding out a canteen. She wanted to snatch it from his hand and dump the whole thing over her head, but her arms wouldn't cooperate. They were shaking too badly to lift. Colt knelt down, uncapped the canteen, and held it to her lips. The water was warm and tasted like metal, but it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever experienced. She drank desperately, some of it spilling down her chin. "Slow," he said, pulling it back. "You'll make yourself sick." She gasped for air, water dripping from her cracked lips. "Why?" The word came out hoarse and broken. "Why didn't you just let me ride?" He corked the canteen and stood up. "Because walking here was easy compared to what comes next. If you can't handle 6 hours in the heat, you can't handle frontier life. Better to find out now." "That's cruel. That's reality." He turned away, moved back to his horse. "We camp here tonight. Ranch is another 3 hours tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" She couldn't keep the despair out of her voice. "I have to do this again tomorrow?" He didn't answer, just started unpacking supplies for the night, bedroll, jerky, more water. Moving with the efficient calm of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Evelyn lay there on the hard ground, staring up at the sky as it shifted from blue to orange to deep purple. Stars were starting to appear. More stars than she'd ever seen in her life, endless and cold and completely indifferent to her suffering. Her father's words kept replaying in her head. Too weak to survive. Too fragile to marry. Too useless to keep. Maybe he was right. Maybe she really was that pathetic. Here! She turned her head to find Colt holding out a piece of dried meat. When she didn't take it, he dropped it on the ground next to her. Eat. We leave at first light. Then he walked away, spread out his bedroll on the other side of the small camp, and lay down with his back to her. Like she wasn't even worth acknowledging as a fellow human being, Evelyn stared at the jerky. Her stomach was so empty it hurt, but the thought of eating made her nauseous. Everything hurt. Everything was wrong. She was alone in the desert with a man who clearly despised her, heading toward a future she couldn't begin to imagine, with no way home and no one who cared whether she lived or died. She should cry. She wanted to cry. But the tears wouldn't come. Maybe she was too dehydrated, or maybe she'd used them all up during the walk. Instead, she forced herself to sit up, gasped at the way her muscles protested, looked down at her ruined dress, her bloody feet, her torn hands. She looked like she'd been in a war. Maybe she had been. The jerky was tough and oversalted and tasted like leather. She chewed it anyway, forcing down every piece. Then she drank more water from the canteen Colt had left within reach. Slow sips, like he'd told her. Around the camp, the desert was coming alive with night sounds. Things scurrying through the brush, the distant yip of coyotes, wind moving through the rocks with a low, mournful sound. It should have been terrifying, and it was. But underneath the fear was something else, something small and stubborn that refused to die no matter how much today had tried to kill it. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, quiet kind that settled deep in her bones and refused to leave. Anger at her father for abandoning her. Anger at that town for their cruelty. Anger at Colt for his indifference. But mostly, anger at herself. For being weak enough that everyone assumed she would fail. For living her whole life trying to be what other people wanted and still ending up alone and unwanted. She was done with that version of herself. If this frontier wanted to break her, it would have to work harder. Evelyn pulled off her remaining boot, examined her destroyed feet in the fading light, then tore strips from her ruined petticoat to wrap the worst of the bleeding. It wasn't proper bandaging. She had no idea what proper bandaging even looked like, but it was better than nothing. Then she lay down on the hard ground without a bedroll, using her arm as a pillow, and stared up at those endless cold stars. Tomorrow she would walk again, and the day after that, and however many days it took until she reached Colt's ranch and whatever fresh hell waited for her there. But she wouldn't quit. Let them all think she was too weak to survive. Let them laugh and make their bets on how fast she'd fail. She'd prove every single one of them wrong, even if it killed her. Across the camp, Colt Maddox lay on his bedroll and listened to the girl trying not to cry. He'd expected her to break hours ago. Expected tears and begging and demands to be taken back to town. That's what city people did when faced with real hardship. They folded. But she hadn't. She'd bled and suffered and fallen and kept getting back up. Kept walking. Even when he could see her legs shaking with exhaustion, even when she was clearly in agony, she'd kept going. He'd underestimated her. That was dangerous. Colt didn't like complications, and Evelyn Carter was clearly going to be a complication. He'd taken Richard Carter's offer because he needed the land and the money. Simple transaction. The girl was supposed to be extra labor, someone to cook and clean and handle the household work he didn't have time for. Cheap help, basically. Instead, he'd gotten this fragile, stubborn creature who looked like a strong wind would break her, but somehow had survived 6 hours of hell without breaking. He didn't know what to do with that. Tomorrow would be worse. The trail to the ranch was steeper, rockier, less forgiving. She'd probably make it halfway before collapsing for good. Then he'd have to put her on the horse and deal with the failure he'd been expecting all along. But a small part of him, the part he usually kept buried deep, wondered if maybe she'd surprise him again. The desert night grew colder. Colt pulled his blanket tighter and closed his eyes. Behind him, Evelyn Carter lay shivering on the bare ground, every inch of her body screaming in pain, and forced herself to keep breathing. In and out. Survive until morning. That's all that mattered now. Just survive. Dawn came too early and too cold. Evelyn woke to find frost coating her torn dress and her entire body locked up like rusted metal. For a terrible moment, she couldn't move at all. Her muscles had seized during the night, turning her into a rigid sculpture of pain. "Up!" Colt's voice cut through the early morning silence. "We're burning daylight." She tried to respond, but her jaw wouldn't cooperate. Everything hurt worse than yesterday. How was that even possible? Yesterday had been the worst day of her life, and somehow her body had found new depths of agony overnight. "I said up." Footsteps approached. Then Colt's face appeared above her, his expression as cold as the morning air. "You dead?" "Not yet," she managed through chattering teeth. "Then move." He walked away without offering to help. Evelyn lay there for another few seconds, wondering if her body would actually obey if she asked it to. Only one way to find out. Getting to her feet was a special kind of torture. Every muscle screamed. Her wrapped feet felt like someone had spent the night beating them with hammers. When she finally stood upright, the world tilted sideways and she had to grab a nearby rock to keep from falling. Colt was already packed up, sitting on his horse, waiting. The sun was barely cresting the horizon, and he looked as fresh as if he'd slept in a feather bed. Meanwhile, Evelyn was pretty sure she looked like something that had crawled out of a grave. 3 more hours, he said. Try to keep up better than yesterday. Better than yesterday? She'd nearly killed herself keeping up yesterday. But arguing would waste energy she didn't have, so she just started walking. If the first day had been hell, the second day was whatever came after hell. The terrain grew steeper almost immediately, winding up through rocky canyons and narrow passes that made her already abused feet scream with every step. The makeshift bandages she'd made from her petticoat came loose within the first hour, leaving her feet exposed again to the sharp stones and thorny brush. She fell twice in the first mile. The second time, she landed hard on her shoulder, and something made a popping sound that sent white-hot pain shooting down her arm. She bit her tongue to keep from crying out, tasted blood, and forced herself back up. Colt never stopped, never looked back, just kept riding. By the second hour, Evelyn's mind started doing strange things. The pain became almost distant, like it was happening to someone else. She found herself thinking about her mother, who died when Evelyn was 12. Gentle and kind and utterly unable to stand up to her husband. Had she been weak too? Or just worn down by years of trying to be enough for a man who would never be satisfied? Almost there. Colt's voice snapped her back to reality. She looked up to find they'd crested a ridge. Below them, in a small valley carved between 2 mountains, sat a cabin. Calling it rustic would have been generous. It was barely more than a wooden box with a stone chimney, surrounded by a few rough outbuildings and a corral that looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed near it. This was where she was going to live. This isolated, primitive place at the end of the world. Something must have shown on her face because Colt's jaw tightened. "It's not a Boston mansion." "I didn't say anything. Didn't have to." He urged his horse forward down the steep trail. "Come on." The final descent was the worst part. The path was barely wide enough for the horse, let alone a person in a destroyed dress trying to navigate loose stones with ruined feet. Evelyn slipped and slid more than walked, grabbing at rocks and bushes to keep from tumbling down the slope. When she finally reached the bottom, her legs gave out. She went down on her hands and knees in the dirt yard in front of the cabin and stayed there, gasping for breath. "Inside," Colt said, already dismounting. "Water barrels by the door. Clean yourself up." Clean herself up, like she was just dusty from a pleasant ride, not covered in blood and filth from 2 days of torture. But she was too tired to argue, too tired to do anything but crawl, actually crawl, the last few feet to the water barrel. The water was ice cold and probably the most beautiful thing she'd ever felt. She plunged her hands in first, hissing at the sting against her raw palms, then splashed it on her face. It ran down in muddy rivulets, carrying away layers of dust and sweat and dried blood. Behind her, she heard Colt unsaddling his horse, moving around with calm efficiency, like this was just another normal day for him. Probably was. "Can you cook?" he asked without turning around. Evelyn almost laughed. "No." "Can you clean?" "I've never had to." "Can you sew, mend clothes, preserve food, tend animals?" "No, none of it." She turned to look at him, dripping water on the ground. "I can play piano. I speak French. I know which fork to use at formal dinners. Will any of that help?" His expression didn't change. Not even a little. Then I guess you got a bad deal. Yeah. He finished with his horse and turned to face her fully. I guess I did. The word shouldn't have hurt. She'd been told worse yesterday by her own father. But something about the flat, disappointed way Colt said it made her chest tight. Your father said you were healthy and capable, he continued. Said you'd been running his household for years. That was a lie, wasn't it? I ran the social calendar. I organized parties and dinners. I managed the servants who did the actual work. She pushed wet hair out of her face. He didn't technically lie. He just didn't tell you the whole truth. There a difference? Not one that matters now, I guess. Colt was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those cold gray eyes. Then he sighed, a sound of pure frustration. Can't send you back. Already spent the money on feed and supplies for winter, so I guess we're stuck with each other. Lucky us. His eyes narrowed. You got something to say? Everything. She had everything to say. About how he'd forced her to walk until she bled. About how he'd shown her less compassion than he would a stray dog. About how her father had sold her like cattle, and Colt had accepted the deal knowing exactly what that meant. But starting a fight with the only person for miles wouldn't help her survive. So she swallowed all of it and just shook her head. Good. He pointed at the cabin. You'll sleep in there. There's a cot by the stove and some blankets. I sleep in the lean-to out back. Why? Why what? Why do you sleep outside when there's a cabin? He looked at her like she was simple. Because I don't trust you. The blunt honesty of it was almost refreshing. At least he wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. Tomorrow we start training, he continued. If you're going to survive here, you need to learn everything. Cooking, cleaning, how to shoot, how to ride properly, how to handle livestock, all of it. And if I can't learn, then you'll die. Probably within the first hard winter. He said it without emotion, just stating a fact. This isn't the city. Nobody's going to save you out here. You pull your weight, or you don't make it. Understood. I doubt that, but you will. He started walking toward the cabin. Come on, I'll show you where things are. The inside of the cabin was exactly as primitive as the outside suggested. One large room with a stone fireplace at one end, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a few shelves holding supplies, and the promised cot shoved against the far wall. Everything was functional and nothing was comfortable. But it was shelter. And after 2 nights on the ground, even a thin cot looked like heaven. Stoves for cooking and heat, Colt said, pointing at the cast-iron monstrosity near the fireplace. Wood's outside in the covered pile. Keep it stocked. Fire goes out at night. You'll freeze before morning. He showed her the larder, a small, cool room dug into the earth beneath the floorboards, accessed by a heavy trapdoor. It was stocked with basics. Flour, salt, dried beans, some kind of cured meat that looked like it might be older than her. How long have you lived here? She asked, staring at the sparse supplies. 3 years. Built most of it myself. 3 years alone in this isolated valley. She tried to imagine it and couldn't. Don't you get lonely? No. He climbed back up out of the larder. I like the quiet. The implied criticism was clear. She was going to disrupt his quiet. She was an unwanted complication in his simple, solitary life. There's a creek about 50 yards east, he continued. That's for washing, clothes, yourself, whatever. Don't foul it with waste. Outhouse is on the other side of the cabin. Try not to fall in. Is there anything I'm allowed to do right, or should I just assume I'll fail at everything? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Colt stopped and looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since they'd arrived. You walk 2 days through country that kills grown men, he said slowly, bleeding and burning up and probably wanting to quit every step, but you didn't. So no, I don't think you'll fail at everything. I think you'll fail at most things until you learn not to. It was possibly the closest thing to encouragement he was capable of giving. Now get some sleep, he said, heading for the door. You look half dead. Training starts at dawn, whether you're ready or not. He left before she could respond. The door closed behind him, and Evelyn was alone in the dim cabin, standing in her ruined dress in the middle of nowhere, with a man who clearly wished she didn't exist. She wanted to collapse on that cot and sleep for 3 days straight, but first she needed to get out of this dress. The corset was cutting into her ribs so badly she could barely breathe, and the fabric was stiff with dried sweat and blood. It took her 20 minutes to get undressed. Her fingers wouldn't cooperate, shaking with exhaustion and fumbling with buttons and laces she normally would have had a maid handle. When she finally stepped out of the destroyed dress, she felt like she'd shed a skin. The relief of being able to breathe fully was so intense it almost made her dizzy. She found a rough blanket and wrapped it around herself, then examined her feet in the dim light filtering through the cabin's one small window. They were worse than she'd thought. Blisters on top of blisters, some open and weeping, cuts across her soles and toes, her ankles were swollen and bruised. No wonder every step felt like walking on knives. There was a bucket of clean water by the door. Colt must have filled it before leaving. She used it to clean her feet as gently as she could, biting her lip against the pain. Then she tore more strips from her already destroyed petticoat and wrapped them carefully, trying to remember how she'd seen bandages done in books. It probably wasn't right, but it was better than nothing. Her hands were almost as bad. Palms torn up, nails broken, fingers cut and swollen. The shoulder she'd landed on earlier was already turning purple. When she touched it, pain radiated down her entire arm. She was a disaster, a broken, bleeding disaster who couldn't cook or clean or do any of the things she apparently needed to know to survive. Her father's voice echoed in her head. Too weak, too fragile, too useless. "Shut up," she whispered to the empty cabin. "Just shut up." She limped to the cot and lowered herself onto it carefully. The thin mattress wasn't much, but after sleeping on bare ground, it felt miraculous. She pulled the scratchy blanket over herself and closed her eyes. Sleep came fast, dragging her under like a riptide. She dreamed of the desert, of walking forever through endless heat while her father's laughter echoed from the sky, of Colt riding ahead on his horse, always just out of reach, never looking back, of her mother's face, sad and disappointed, shaking her head. When she woke, it was dark outside and someone was moving around in the cabin. Evelyn sat up too fast, gasping. Pain shot through her shoulder and her vision swam. "Easy," Colt's voice came from near the stove. "Just me." Her heart was hammering. "What are you doing?" "Making food. You slept through the day. Need to eat something or you'll be useless tomorrow." She blinked, trying to orient herself. Through the window she could see stars. How long had she been asleep? The light from the stove cast flickering shadows across Colt's face as he worked, making him look almost demonic. "I can make my own food," she said, though she had absolutely no idea how. "Sure you can." He didn't look up from whatever he was cooking. "Just like you can ride and shoot and survive on your own. You don't have to be cruel about it. Not being cruel, being honest. There's a difference." He stirred something in a pot that smelled surprisingly good. Some kind of stew, maybe. "You want to survive here? You need to stop thinking like a city person. Nobody's going to be nice to you. Nobody's going to make things easy. You learn fast or you die hard. That's how it works." "That's a terrible way to live." "It's the only way to live out here." He ladled stew into a bowl and brought it over to her. "Eat. All of it. You're too skinny as it is." She took the bowl. The stew was simple, just meat and beans and some kind of vegetable she didn't recognize, but it was hot and it was food. Her stomach growled so loudly, Colt actually smirked. "When's the last time you ate anything besides that jerky?" he asked. Evelyn thought about it. "Before we left town, 2 days ago." 2 days. He shook his head. "And you walked all that way on an empty stomach. You really are too stubborn to die, aren't you?" "Apparently." She ate slowly, forcing herself not to wolf it down even though she wanted to. The stew wasn't fancy, but it was the best thing she'd ever tasted, probably because she was half-starved. Colt sat down at the table with his own bowl, eating in silence. In the firelight, he looked less harsh. Still rough and hard-edged, but maybe slightly more human. She studied him while trying not to be obvious about it. He was younger than she'd first thought. Maybe 30. 32? The sun damage and hard living made him look older, but there were no gray hairs in that dark hair, no real lines around his eyes yet. Strong jaw, straight nose that looked like it had been broken at least once, hands that were scarred and calloused but moved with surprising grace. "What?" he said without looking up. She startled. "Nothing. You're staring." "I'm trying to figure you out." "Don't bother. Nothing to figure out." He finished his stew in a few more bites, then stood. "When you're done eating, go back to sleep. Dawn comes early and tomorrow's going to be worse than today." How could it possibly be worse than the last 2 days? Because today you were unconscious for most of it. Tomorrow you'll be awake for the whole nightmare. He moved toward the door. Sleep while you can. Colt? He paused, hand on the door, but didn't turn around. Why did you agree to this? Taking me, I mean. Was it really just for the land and money? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, yeah, that's all it was. He left before she could ask anything else. Evelyn finished her stew alone, listening to the night sounds outside, wind through the trees, distant animal calls, the creek babbling somewhere in the darkness. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it just felt isolating. She washed her bowl in the bucket of water, dried it clumsily with a rag, and put it back on the shelf. Then she returned to the cot and lay down, staring up at the rough wooden ceiling. Tomorrow would be worse, he'd said. She believed him. Everything about this place was designed to break people who weren't tough enough. And she wasn't tough. She was soft and weak and completely unprepared for this life. But she was still here, still breathing, still fighting. That had to count for something. Dawn came like a slap to the face. One moment Evelyn was deeply asleep. The next Colt was banging on something metal right outside the cabin, making a noise that could probably wake the dead. Up! He shouted. Daylight's burning! She dragged herself upright, every muscle protesting. Her feet were still agony. Her shoulder was worse, stiff and swollen and radiating pain with every movement. Moving felt impossible. She moved anyway. Outside, Colt was waiting with what looked like a very old rifle. First lesson, shooting. Shouldn't I learn to cook first? Or clean? Something useful? You can't eat if you're dead. Shooting's more important. He thrust the rifle at her. Take it. The gun was heavier than she expected. She nearly dropped it, fumbling to get a proper grip. Colt watched with an expression that suggested he was already regretting everything. Have you ever held a gun before? He asked. No? Ever seen someone shoot? In a theater production once. I don't think that counts. It doesn't. He moved behind her, adjusting her grip with rough efficiency. This is how you hold it. Stock against your shoulder, the good shoulder, not the injured one. Left hand here, right hand here. Finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. His hands were large and warm against hers, positioning her with practiced ease. She could smell leather and smoke and something else she couldn't identify. Horse, maybe. Or just wilderness. See that tree? He pointed at a dead pine about 30 yards away. That's your target. You're going to shoot it. Right now. No, next week. Yes, right now. He stepped back. Line up the sights, breathe out slow, squeeze the trigger gentle, don't pull, squeeze. Evelyn tried to do what he said. The gun was shaking in her hands. The sights kept moving. Her injured shoulder was screaming at her. Breathe, Colt said. She squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked back so hard it knocked her flat on her ass. The sound was deafening. Her shoulder felt like someone had hit it with a hammer, and the bullet went somewhere. Definitely not anywhere near the tree. Colt looked down at her sprawled in the dirt. Well, that was terrible. I told you I couldn't shoot. And now you're learning. Get up. She got up. He positioned her again, made her shoot again. The second shot went slightly closer to the target, but still nowhere near it. The third shot actually hit a different tree entirely. The fourth missed everything. By the 10th shot, her shoulder was so swollen she could barely lift the gun. Tears were streaming down her face from the pain, but she refused to stop, refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her quit. Enough, Colt finally said, taking the gun from her shaking hands. You're done for today. I didn't hit it once. No, but you also didn't quit. That's something. He started walking back toward the cabin. Next lesson, cooking. The cooking lesson was somehow even more humiliating than the shooting. Colt set her up at the stove with basic ingredients and instructions to make biscuits. Simple, he said. Anyone could make biscuits. Evelyn proved him wrong within 15 minutes. The first batch burned so badly they were like charcoal rocks. The second batch never cooked through at all, hard and doughy on the outside, raw in the middle. The third batch somehow managed to be both burned and raw at the same time, which Colt said was actually impressive in its own terrible way. How are you this bad at this? He asked, staring at the latest disaster. I don't know, I'm following your instructions. Following them wrong, apparently. He rubbed his face, looking tired. Okay, we're going to do this different. Watch me. He made a batch of biscuits in about 5 minutes flat, moving with the same efficient grace he brought to everything. Mix dry ingredients, cut in fat, add liquid, don't overwork the dough, bake until golden. See, he said. Easy. Easy for you. Try again. I'll watch. She tried again. This batch came out slightly less terrible. At least they were edible, even if they tasted like dense flour pucks. Colt ate one without complaining, which she took as a small victory. Better, he said. Keep practicing. Now, chickens? There were chickens. Of course there were chickens, a small coop behind the cabin that apparently needed tending every day. Feeding them was easy enough. Just scatter grain and they went crazy for it. But collecting eggs turned out to be its own special challenge. Just reach under them and grab the eggs, Colt said, like it was simple. They're pecking me. They're chickens. They can't hurt you. Tell that to my hands. One particularly aggressive hen had already pecked her 3 times, drawing blood on fingers that were already cut up from the desert. Colt sighed, reached into the coop, and pulled out 3 eggs in about 2 seconds. The chickens didn't even try to peck him. Like that. They hate me. They don't know you well enough to hate you. Try again. By the end of the day, Evelyn had learned to shoot poorly, cook barely, collect eggs with minimal blood loss, and split firewood in a way that only occasionally sent the axe flying into dangerous areas. She'd also learned that every single activity made her injured shoulder worse, her ruined feet scream, and her already battered body find new ways to hurt. Tomorrow, Colt said as the sun was setting, we work on riding. I know how to ride. You know how to sit on a horse while someone else leads it around a city park. That's not riding. He was cleaning the rifle they'd used earlier, his movements methodical. Out here, you need to ride for hours over rough country. Stay on even when the horse spooks. Handle the animal yourself. Fine. You say fine, but you don't mean it. How do you know what I mean? He looked up from his rifle. Because every time I tell you about the next lesson, you get this look on your face, like you're heading to an execution. Maybe I am. Maybe. He went back to cleaning. But you keep showing up anyway. That's more than most people would do. It wasn't praise exactly, but it wasn't criticism either. Coming from him, it felt almost like respect. That night, after another simple meal she'd managed not to completely ruin, Evelyn lay on her cot and took inventory of her body. New bruises on top of old ones, blisters that had popped and reformed, muscles so sore that even breathing hurt. Her shoulder was probably genuinely injured, maybe dislocated or fractured. She should rest it. She knew she wouldn't, because tomorrow there would be riding lessons. And the day after that, something else. And the day after that, more challenges designed to prove she couldn't handle this life. And she was going to show up for every single one and force herself to survive it. Not because she wanted to, not because it was noble or brave or any of those things people said when they told stories about overcoming adversity, but because the alternative was proving her father right. And that was something she absolutely refused to do. Outside, she could hear Colt moving around in his lean-to, settling in for the night. Tomorrow he would wake her at dawn and put her through another day of torture disguised as training. He would be distant and harsh and critical. He would show her no mercy, and she would show him she didn't need it. The first week passed in a brutal blur. Every day started before sunrise and ended long after dark. Shooting until her shoulder was so damaged she could barely lift her arm. Cooking until her hands were covered in burns and cuts from unfamiliar tools. Riding horses that threw her repeatedly into the dirt. Cleaning and mending and learning 1,000 tiny skills she'd never needed in her old life. Colt was relentless. Every mistake became a lesson delivered in sharp, clipped words. Every failure meant doing it again until she got it right. He never yelled, never lost his temper, just kept pushing her with cold, methodical determination. She hated him for it and respected him for it, often at the same time. By the second week, she could make biscuits that were actually edible, could hit the target tree about 1 time in 5, could stay on a horse at a trot without falling, could split enough wood to keep the fire going, could collect eggs without looking like she'd been in a knife fight. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The physical changes were harder to ignore. Her soft city hands developed calluses. The constant work began building muscles she'd never had. Her skin darkened from the sun despite her best efforts to stay covered. She lost weight at first, the hard work burning through what little reserve she had, but then started gaining it back as muscle. She was becoming someone different, someone she barely recognized. One evening, about 3 weeks in, Colt came back from checking the perimeter to find her successfully roasting a rabbit she'd caught in one of his snares. The meat wasn't falling off the bone like when he cooked it, but it was done all the way through and seasoned properly. He sat down at the table without comment and ate his portion. Then, "Not bad." 2 words. But from Colt Maddox, they felt like a standing ovation. "Thank you," she said quietly. They ate in silence after that, but it felt different somehow. Less hostile. Still not friendly, but maybe approaching something like tolerance. "Your father," Colt said suddenly. "What was his business?" Evelyn looked up, surprised. He'd never asked about her past before. "Shipping, import and export, very successful." "And he only had you? No sons?" "No siblings at all, just me." Must have disappointed him, not having a boy to take over the business. "Yes." The word came out flat. He made that very clear my entire life. Colt was quiet for a moment. "My father was a drunk," he said. "Beat my mother until she died. Then started in on me. I left when I was 14, never looked back." It was the most personal thing he'd ever shared. Evelyn didn't know what to say. "Point is," he continued, "sometimes the people who make us feel worthless are just broken themselves. Doesn't make what they did right. But it helps to remember their judgment doesn't define us." "Is that why you live out here alone?" "Part of it." He pushed back from the table. "Other part is I just don't like people much." "Present company included?" He almost smiled. Almost. "Jury's still out on you." After he left, Evelyn sat at the table and thought about what he'd said. About broken people and worthless feelings and judgment that didn't define you. It should have felt obvious. But somehow, hearing it from someone like Colt, someone who had survived his own kind of hell and come out harder for it, made it feel true in a way it never had before. Maybe she wasn't worthless. Maybe she'd just been surrounded by people too damaged to see her worth. The thought sat in her chest like a warm coal, fragile, uncertain, but there. The rider came on a Tuesday morning in early autumn, his horse lathered and stumbling. Evelyn was hanging laundry when she heard the hoofbeats, and something about the frantic pace made her drop the shirt she was holding and run for the cabin. "Colt!" she shouted, bursting through the door. He was already moving, rifle in hand, having heard it too. They both stepped outside as the rider came into view, a young man, maybe 20, face pale beneath the dirt and sweat. "Help!" he gasped, sliding off his horse before it even stopped. "Please. My sister, she's hurt bad. Real bad. We don't know what to do." "How far?" Colt asked, already moving toward his own horse. "About 2 miles south. There was an accident with the wagon. Wheel came off on a slope and the whole thing rolled. My sister, she got caught under it. Her leg..." His voice broke. "There's so much blood." Evelyn felt her stomach drop. "How long ago?" "Maybe an hour. We tried to stop the bleeding, but it just keeps coming. Moss sent me to find help. You're the closest ranch." He looked between them desperately. "Please." "She's only 14. Colt glanced at Evelyn. "You know anything about treating injuries?" "No, nothing real." She'd read books, seen illustrations and medical texts she'd borrowed from her father's library out of boredom, but reading about something and actually doing it were completely different things. "Better than nothing. Come on." Colt was already saddling his horse. "Can you ride hard?" Her heart was hammering. "I'll manage. Get whatever clean cloth we have, all of it, and bring that bottle of whiskey from the cupboard." He turned to the young man. "You got a name?" "Tom. Tom Fletcher." "All right, Tom. Lead the way. And if that horse drops dead, you're walking." They rode hard. Evelyn clung to her horse with everything she had, terror and adrenaline keeping her from falling as they galloped across rough terrain. Her injured shoulder screamed at her. Her hands, still building their calluses, blistered against the reins. But she kept up. The Fletcher wagon was on its side in a shallow ravine, one wheel completely gone. A woman, Tom's mother presumably, was kneeling beside a girl who was lying too still on the ground. Blood soaked the dirt around them, dark and glistening. Evelyn's first thought was, "There's too much blood." Her second thought was, "She's gonna die." Thank the stars, Mrs. Fletcher sobbed when she saw them coming. Please, please help her. I can't stop the bleeding. Colt dismounted and was beside the girl in seconds. Evelyn followed, her legs shaking as she dropped to the ground. Up close, it was worse. The girl's leg was twisted at a wrong angle beneath her, crushed between the wagon and a rock. Bone showed through torn flesh. Blood pulsed with each heartbeat. Arteries cut, Colt said quietly. His face was grim. She's losing blood fast. What do we do? Mrs. Fletcher's hands were covered in her daughter's blood, shaking violently. Evelyn's mind went blank with panic. She didn't know. She didn't know anything about this. Reading a medical text while drinking tea in a comfortable parlor hadn't prepared her for this, for real blood and real screaming and a real child dying in front of her. Evelyn? Colt's voice cut through the panic. Look at me. She forced her eyes away from the blood, met his gaze. You need to hold her down, he said. I'm going to set the bone and close that artery, and she's going to fight us. You and Mrs. Fletcher hold her shoulders. Tom, you hold her good leg. Don't let her move, understand? I can't, Evelyn started. You can. Now move. Something in his voice flipped a switch in her brain. She moved to the girl's shoulders, kneeling in the blood-soaked dirt. Mrs. Fletcher took the other side. Tom positioned himself at his sister's leg, his face green but determined. What's her name? Evelyn asked. Sarah, Mrs. Fletcher whispered. Sarah's eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow and rapid. Shock, probably. Evelyn had read about shock, the body's response to trauma. It could kill just as surely as blood loss. Sarah, Evelyn said, leaning close to the girl's face. My name is Evelyn. I need you to stay with me, all right? Keep your eyes on me. Don't look anywhere else. The girl's eyes focused slightly, found Evelyn's face. That's good. That's real good. Now, this is going to hurt. It's going to hurt worse than anything you've ever felt. But you need to stay with me. Can you do that? A tiny nod. Ready, Colt said. He had the whiskey bottle open, pouring it over his hands and the girl's mangled leg. Hold her! The screaming started the moment he touched the leg. Sarah thrashed with surprising strength, trying to pull away from the agony. Evelyn used all her weight to keep those thin shoulders pinned, feeling the girl's terror and pain vibrate through her own body. Talk to her, Colt ordered, without looking up. His hands were inside the wound now, working with grim efficiency. Keep her conscious. Sarah, look at me, Evelyn said loudly over the screaming. Eyes on me. Tell me about your favorite thing. What do you love most? It hurts, Sarah sobbed. Stop. Please stop. I know it hurts, but you're strong. You're so strong. Now tell me, favorite thing. Quick. My horse, the girl gasped between sobs. Her name's Daisy. Daisy. That's a beautiful name. What color is Daisy? Brown. She's... Oh God, it hurts. I know. Keep talking. Is Daisy fast? Colt was working with intense concentration, his jaw tight. Blood covered his hands up to his elbows. He'd gotten the bone realigned. Evelyn had felt Sarah's body go rigid when he did it, and now he was doing something with torn flesh and exposed vessels that she couldn't watch. Need to cauterize, he said. Tom, build a fire. Now. Tom scrambled to obey, gathering dry brush with shaking hands. Within minutes, he had flames going. Colt pulled his knife, held the blade in the fire until it glowed. This is the worst part, he said, and his eyes met Evelyn's. Don't let her go. Evelyn gripped Sarah's shoulders harder. Sarah, love, close your eyes. Close them tight, and think about Daisy. Think about riding Daisy through a field on a beautiful day. Can you see it? Yes, Sarah whimpered. Good. Hold on to that. Don't let go. The smell came first, burning flesh, acrid and stomach-turning. Then Sarah's shriek, a sound of pure animal agony that cut straight through Evelyn's chest. The girl convulsed hard enough that all three of them nearly lost their grip. Hold her! Colt barked. Evelyn leaned her full weight on Sarah's shoulders, feeling the girl's heart hammering against her hands, feeling every muscle locked in pain. Tears were streaming down her own face, but she didn't let go. When it was finally over, Sarah went limp. For one terrible moment, Evelyn thought she'd died. Then she saw the shallow rise and fall of the girl's chest. She's alive, Mrs. Fletcher sobbed. Oh, thank heaven, she's alive. For now, Colt said grimly. He was wrapping the leg with strips of cloth, his movement still precise despite the blood covering everything. Leg's a mess, might not save it. An infection could still kill her even if the bleeding doesn't come back. What do we do? Tom asked. His face was streaked with tears. Get her home. Keep the wound clean. Change the bandages twice a day. If you see red streaks coming up from the wound, or if she gets a fever, she's dying, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Colt finished the wrapping and sat back on his heels. That's the best I can do. Mrs. Fletcher grabbed his bloody hands. Thank you. Thank you so much. I thought we'd lost her. Still might, he said bluntly. Next few days will tell. They rigged up a travois using branches and blankets to transport Sarah. The girl drifted in and out of consciousness, moaning softly. Evelyn rode alongside, one hand on Sarah's shoulder, murmuring things she hoped were comforting, but might have just been nonsense. The Fletcher homestead was small, just a cabin and a barn, similar to Colt's place, but even more rough. Mr. Fletcher was there, having stayed behind with the younger children. His face when he saw Sarah was terrible to witness. Will she live? He asked Colt directly. Maybe. Watch for infection. Keep her still. Pray if you're the praying type. They got Sarah settled inside, propped up on the only real bed. Evelyn showed Mrs. Fletcher how to change the bandages, though she was mostly making it up as she went based on what seemed logical. Keep it clean, keep it dry. Watch for signs of rot. I don't know how to thank you, Mrs. Fletcher said as they were preparing to leave. We have nothing to pay you with. Don't need payment, Colt said. Just take care of your daughter. As they rode back toward home, Evelyn couldn't stop shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her hollow and cold despite the afternoon heat. Her hands were covered in dried blood. Her clothes were ruined, and she kept seeing Sarah's leg, that terrible wound, the bone showing through. Pull over, she gasped. Colt stopped. Evelyn barely made it off her horse before she was violently sick in the bushes, heaving up everything in her stomach, and then some. When it was over, she knelt in the dirt, gasping and crying and shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Colt dismounted and crouched beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't try to comfort her, just waited. I almost let go, Evelyn finally said. When he used the knife, I almost couldn't hold her. But you did. What if she dies anyway? What if we did all that and she still dies? Then she dies. But at least she had a chance. He stood, brushed dirt from his knees. You did good today. I don't feel good. I feel... She couldn't find words for what she felt. Shattered, wrong, like something inside her had broken open. Yeah, that's how it feels the first time. He offered her his canteen. Rinse your mouth. We should get back before dark. They rode in silence. But it was a different kind of silence than usual, less isolating, more like they'd survived something together and didn't need to talk about it. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Sarah's mangled leg, heard the screaming, smelled the burning flesh. She finally gave up around midnight and went outside to sit on the porch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. Colt was already there, sitting on the steps, looking out at the dark valley. Can't sleep either, she asked. Never sleep well after something like that? He didn't look at her. Keeps replaying in your head. Does it get easier? No, you just get better at living with it. He was quiet for a moment. She might make it. She's young and strong. And if she doesn't, then you did everything you could. Sometimes that has to be enough. Evelyn sat down beside him, careful to leave space between them. The stars were out again, endless and cold. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. My mother died from an infection, she said quietly. Just a small cut on her hand from a rose thorn. It got infected and spread. The doctors couldn't stop it. She was gone in less than a week. I'm sorry. I was 12. I remember sitting beside her bed, watching her get worse every day, and feeling so useless, so helpless. I couldn't do anything. She pulled the blanket tighter. Today was the first time I've felt useful since then, even though I barely knew what I was doing. Colt glanced at her. You kept that girl conscious, kept her focused on something besides the pain. That matters more than you think. I was terrified the whole time. Courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing what needs doing even when you're scared to death. He stood, stretched. You should try to sleep. We're riding to the Fletcher place tomorrow to check on her. We are? Someone needs to change those bandages properly, and it sure as hell isn't going to be her parents. They're ranchers, not healers. He looked down at her. Unless you'd rather stay here. No, Evelyn said quickly. I want to help. Then get some sleep. He went back to his lean-to, leaving her alone with the stars and the coyotes and the memory of a young girl's blood on her hands. They rode to the Fletcher place every day for the next week. Each time, Evelyn's heart was in her throat, expecting to find Sarah dead. Each time, the girl was still breathing, still fighting. The leg looked terrible, swollen and discolored, oozing fluid that Evelyn cleaned away with steady hands that shook inside. But there were no red streaks, no fever, just pain and the slow, uncertain process of healing. You're getting good at this, Colt observed one evening as they rode home. Evelyn had just changed Sarah's bandages with minimal fumbling, her movements growing more confident. I'm reading everything I can find in those medical books you said were in the trunk. The trunk had belonged to Colt's mother, apparently. A few precious books saved from his childhood. Most of it's outdated, but some principles seem universal. Keep studying. Frontier needs people who know how to patch folks up. Nearest real doctor is 2 days' ride and doesn't come cheap. It was the closest he'd come to suggesting she might actually have value out here. Evelyn felt something warm bloom in her chest. Word spread faster than she expected. By the second week, a rancher showed up at their cabin with his son, who'd gashed his arm open on a piece of metal. The wound was deep and dirty, requiring cleaning and stitching. I heard about the Fletcher girl, the rancher said. Heard you saved her leg. We don't know if we saved it yet, Evelyn said, but she cleaned the boy's wound anyway, using whiskey and boiled water like she'd seen Colt do. The stitching was rough, her hands shook and the thread didn't sit quite right, but it held. Much obliged, the rancher said, pressing 2 eggs into her hand as payment. You got a gift for this, ma'am. A gift. For something she was barely competent at, but she took the eggs and thanked him, and after he left, she stared at them like they were gold. People are going to start coming here, Colt said that night over dinner. Once word gets out, there's someone who can help with injuries. Is that a problem? Depends. You planning to help them? Evelyn thought about it. About Sarah's screaming and the blood and the terror. About how she'd wanted to run away but hadn't. About how afterward, despite the horror of it, she'd felt more alive than she had in years. Yes, she said. I think I am. More people came. A woman in labor whose midwife couldn't be reached in time. Evelyn delivered the baby with hands that shook so badly she nearly dropped the slippery, squalling infant. A man thrown from his horse with a dislocated shoulder. She and Colt popped it back in while he bit down on a leather strap. A child with a fever that wouldn't break. She spent 3 days keeping him cool, forcing water down his throat, until finally the fever cracked. Not everyone lived. A rancher died from an infected leg wound despite everything she tried. An elderly woman's heart gave out while Evelyn was treating her for a fall. Each death hit hard, made her question everything, but Colt kept her grounded. You can't save everyone, he said after the rancher died. All you can do is give them a chance. The work was brutal and terrifying and often thankless. But it was also the first time in her life that Evelyn felt like what she did mattered, like she mattered. The fire came in late October, carried on brutal winds that turned a small brush fire into an inferno. Evelyn was in the cabin when Tom Fletcher came thundering up on his horse, his face black with smoke. Fire! He shouted. Whole Eastern Valley's burning. There's families trapped. Colt was already moving. How many? Don't know. At least 3 homesteads. The Morrison place, the Santos family, maybe more. Wind's pushing the flames fast. Get everyone who can help to the creek bend, Colt ordered. We'll make a stand there. Evelyn? I'm coming, she said before he could finish. You'll be more useful treating the injured. Then I'll treat the injured there. I'm coming. He looked like he wanted to argue but didn't have time. Fine. Bring everything you've got. And stay away from the flames. The ride to the creek was through smoke so thick it burned her lungs and made her eyes stream. She could see the fire in the distance, a wall of orange eating through everything in its path. The heat was intense even from here. At the creek bend, chaos reigned. Families were arriving with whatever possessions they'd managed to save. Children were crying, animals were panicking, and men were forming bucket lines, preparing to fight the fire when it reached them. "Injured over here," someone shouted. Evelyn ran toward the voice. A man was lying on the ground, his shirt burned away, skin blistered and weeping. A woman beside him had a broken arm, bone showing through. A child was coughing so hard he couldn't breathe. The panic tried to take her again. Too many. Too much. She couldn't help all of them. But then she heard Sarah's voice from that first day. Heard herself saying, "You're strong. You're so strong." And she realized she'd been talking to herself as much as the girl. "You." She pointed at a young woman standing frozen nearby. "I need clean water, as much as you can carry. You, find me cloth, anything clean. And you," she grabbed a teenage boy, "help me move this man closer to the creek." Her hands moved on autopilot. "Clean the burns, wrap them loosely. Don't seal them tight or the heat has nowhere to go. Splint the broken arm. Get the child breathing." She remembered reading about steam for congested lungs, held his face over a pot of boiling water while he coughed up black phlegm. More injured arrived. A woman pulled from a burning building with smoke inhalation. A man who'd been trampled by panicking livestock. 2 children with minor burns. An elderly woman in shock. Evelyn moved between them, her mind racing, trying to remember everything she'd learned from books and practice. The burn victim needed to be kept cool. The trampled man needed pressure on his bleeding wounds. The children needed comfort as much as treatment. The woman in shock needed to be kept warm and still. She was everywhere at once, her hands covered in blood and ash, her voice hoarse from shouting instructions to the people helping her. She didn't think, didn't have time to think, just moved from one crisis to the next, doing what needed doing. Hours later, or maybe it was days, time had lost all meaning. Someone grabbed her shoulder. She spun, ready to deal with another emergency, and found Colt standing there. "Fire's under control," he said. His face was black with smoke and soot. "Creek held. Everyone's safe." Evelyn looked around. The makeshift camp was full of exhausted people, but they were alive. The injured she'd treated were resting. Some would have scars. Some would have pain for the rest of their lives. But they'd survived. "How many did we lose?" she asked. 3, Colt said quietly. Morrison didn't make it out of his barn. The Santos boy died from smoke before he reached the creek. And old Mrs. Chen's heart gave out from the stress. 3 dead. It should have felt like failure, but somehow it didn't, because looking around at all the people who were alive, who were breathing and crying and holding their children, she knew it could have been so much worse. "You did good," Colt said. "Real good. I couldn't save everyone." "No, but you saved a lot of them." He gestured at the people scattered around the camp. "They're going to remember this. Remember you." As if to prove his point, Mrs. Fletcher appeared with Sarah limping beside her, using a rough crutch. The girl's leg was healing, though she'd probably always have a limp. But she was alive and walking. "Thank you," Sarah said, throwing her arms around Evelyn in a fierce hug. "Ma told me what you did today, what you've been doing for everyone." Evelyn hugged her back, this girl she'd helped save, and felt tears finally breaking through the exhaustion. "You're welcome, love. You're so welcome." More people came over, thanking her, shaking her hand, pressing small gifts into her arms, food, cloth, a hand-carved wooden box, things they could barely afford to give but gave anyway. "The city girl who couldn't do anything," someone muttered, but this time it wasn't mocking. It was amazed, maybe even respectful. Evelyn caught Colt watching her from across the camp. Their eyes met. He gave a single nod. She nodded back. That night, after everyone had settled as best they could, after she'd checked on the injured one more time, Evelyn collapsed beside the creek. Her whole body ached. Her hands were raw and blistered. Her clothes were destroyed. She smelled like smoke and blood and burned flesh. But she'd done it. She'd actually done it. Colt sat down beside her, dunking his own burned hands in the cold water. "You scared?" "Terrified," she admitted. "All day, every moment. What if I did something wrong? What if someone died because I didn't know enough?" "Some of them did die." "I know." The weight of those 3 deaths sat heavy on her chest. "I keep thinking, if I'd been faster or smarter or—" "Stop." His voice was firm. You can't think like that. You do your best and sometimes it's not enough. That's the truth of it. But you don't quit because it's hard. You keep going because the ones who lived need you just as much as the ones who died. She looked at him. His face was streaked with ash and exhaustion, but his eyes were clear, certain. How do you do it? She asked. Keep going when it hurts this much? You just do. Day after day. Until one day you realize you're still here, still standing, and that has to mean something. He stood, offered her his hand. Come on. You should sleep before the next crisis hits. She took his hand and let him pull her up. His grip was strong and warm and steady. For the first time since arriving in this brutal frontier, Evelyn felt like maybe she belonged here. Not because she'd become perfect. Not because she'd stopped being scared. But because she'd found something worth fighting for, even when the fight was terrifying. The people around this creek needed her. Sarah needed her, and she needed them right back. That had to be enough. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the mountains with a cold that felt personal. By November, snow was falling in thick sheets, and the valley was cut off from the wider world. The families whose homes had burned moved in together, cramming into whatever shelter remained standing. And almost daily, someone showed up at Colt's cabin looking for Evelyn. She'd become something she never intended. Not quite a doctor. She had no formal training, no credentials, just desperate experience and a growing collection of medical texts she studied by candlelight until her eyes burned. But in a place where the nearest real physician was impossible to reach half the year, desperate experience was enough. Another one, Colt said one morning, looking out the window at a wagon pulling up through the snow. That's the third this week. Evelyn was grinding herbs she'd dried in the fall. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain, comfrey for broken bones. Her hands moved automatically now, the motions familiar. Who is it? Don't recognize the wagon. Looks like they came from far off, though. Horses are about done in. She wiped her hands and went outside. A man was climbing down from the wagon, his face haggard with exhaustion, and something worse. Fear. You the healer? He asked without preamble. I'm Evelyn. I help when I can. My wife, she's been in labor for 2 days. The baby won't come. The midwife said... His voice cracked. She said there's nothing more she can do, that I should prepare myself. But I heard about you, heard you've saved people when others couldn't. Evelyn's stomach dropped. 2 days in labor. That was bad. That was potentially fatal for both mother and child. Where is she? Back home, about 4 hours south. I came ahead to fetch you. He grabbed her arm, desperation making him rough. Please, she's all I have. Let her go, Colt's voice came from the doorway. Calm, but with an edge. The man released Evelyn immediately. I'm sorry, I'm just... Please. Will you come? Evelyn looked at Colt. He gave a slight shake of his head. 4 hours there, however long the birth took. 4 hours back. In this weather, it was dangerous. The snow was getting worse. They could get lost. Freeze to death. But she was already moving inside to pack her supplies. Give me 5 minutes. Evelyn, Colt said quietly as she passed him. This is a bad idea. Probably. But if I don't go, she dies. The baby dies. Both of them. She started throwing things into her bag. Clean cloth, her precious bottle of carbolic acid for cleaning wounds, scissors, thread. I have to try. Then I'm coming with you. You don't have to eat. Yes, I do. Because when you get yourself lost in a blizzard trying to save people, someone needs to be there to drag your stubborn ass home. He was already pulling on his heavy coat. 5 minutes, then we leave. The ride was brutal. The man, his name was James Crawford, led them through snow that got deeper with each mile. The wind cut through even Evelyn's heaviest clothes, and her hands went numb on the reins despite her gloves. Colt rode close beside her, watching her constantly, ready to catch her if the cold made her fall. When they finally reached the Crawford homestead, Evelyn could hear the screaming from outside. The cabin was small and dark, heated only by a struggling fireplace. The midwife was packing up her things with the resigned air of someone leaving a lost cause. In the bed, a woman writhed in agony, her face gray with exhaustion. Mary, James rushed to his wife's side. Mary, I brought help. The healer from the mountain. She's here. Mary Crawford's eyes found Evelyn. They were dull with pain and resignation. "Too late," she whispered. "It's too late." "Let me look," Evelyn said, setting down her bag. To the midwife, "What have you tried?" "Everything." The older woman shook her head. "Baby's positioned wrong, sideways. Can't turn it, can't get it out. She's too weak to push anymore, even if it were positioned right. I've seen this before. They both go, usually." "I'm sorry. Positioned wrong." Evelyn's mind raced through everything she'd read about difficult births. There were techniques, dangerous, risky techniques that could kill the mother if done wrong, but if she did nothing, Mary would definitely die. "I need everyone out except Mr. Crawford," Evelyn said, "and I need more light. All the lanterns you have." "What are you going to do?" the midwife asked. "Try to turn the baby." "That'll kill her for sure. You're not strong enough to—" "Out!" Evelyn's voice came out harder than she intended. "Now!" The midwife left, muttering about foolish girls playing at medicine. Colt paused at the door, met Evelyn's eyes. She saw the question there. "Are you sure?" She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. He left, closing the door behind him. Evelyn washed her hands in the carbolic solution until they burned, then turned to Mary. "I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to hurt worse than anything you've felt so far, and I might fail. But if I don't try, you and your baby will both die. Do you understand?" Mary nodded weakly. "Do it." The next hour was the longest of Evelyn's life. She worked with her hands inside Mary's body, feeling for the baby, trying to remember the diagrams she'd seen in books, trying to visualize what she couldn't see. The baby was indeed sideways, wedged in wrong. She needed to shift it, rotate it, guide it into position. Mary's screams filled the cabin. James held his wife's hand, tears streaming down his face. Evelyn's arms ached, her fingers cramping from the delicate work. Sweat dripped into her eyes despite the cold. "Almost," she gasped. "Almost there. Mary, I need you to breathe. Don't push yet. Not yet." She felt the baby shift, just slightly, then more. The head was turning, moving into position. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost lost her grip. "Now," she said. "Now push. Everything you have left." Mary pushed. The baby moved, stuck again. Another push, more movement. Then suddenly the baby was coming, sliding out into Evelyn's waiting hands. A girl, blue and silent. "No," Evelyn whispered. She cleared the baby's mouth, rubbed its chest. Nothing. "Come on, come on." She remembered reading about this, about babies who didn't breathe right away, about— what was it? She turned the baby over, supporting its head, and struck its back firmly. A cough, then a wail. The baby turned pink, her cry filling the room. Evelyn nearly collapsed with relief. "Mary," James sobbed. "Mary, you hear that? Our baby's crying, our baby's alive." But Mary wasn't responding. Her eyes had rolled back. Blood was pooling beneath her. "No, no, no." Evelyn laid the crying baby aside and turned back to Mary. The afterbirth should have come by now. Why hadn't it come? She reached inside again, felt torn tissue. Mary was hemorrhaging, bleeding out from somewhere inside. Evelyn's mind went blank with panic. This wasn't something she'd read about. This was beyond her knowledge, beyond her capability. She needed a real doctor, a surgeon, someone who actually knew what they were doing. But there was no one. Just her. Her hands moved automatically, doing what they could. Packing the wound with cloth to slow the bleeding. Pressing on Mary's abdomen to encourage the uterus to contract. It wasn't enough. The blood kept coming. "James, I need you to hold this cloth here," she ordered. "Press down, hard. Don't stop." He obeyed, his face white with terror. Evelyn ran to her bag, pulled out every herb she knew could help with bleeding, made a paste, forced it into Mary's mouth. Then she pressed her own hands to the woman's abdomen, using all her weight. "Stay with me, Mary," she said. "You've got a beautiful daughter who needs you. You stay with me." Mary's eyes fluttered open, found Evelyn's face. "Cold," she whispered. "I know, but you're going to be fine, you hear me? You're going to live." Evelyn kept the pressure constant, kept willing Mary's body to clot, to stop betraying itself. "Think about your daughter. She needs a name. What are you going to call her?" Rose, Mary breathed. Like my mother. Rose, that's beautiful. Rose needs you, Mary, so you keep fighting. The bleeding was slowing. Maybe. It was hard to tell. Evelyn's arms were screaming from the constant pressure, but she didn't ease up. Couldn't ease up. Minutes crawled by, then an hour. The bleeding slowed to a trickle, then stopped. Mary was still alive. Barely. Her pulse was thready and weak, her breathing shallow, but alive. Keep her warm, Evelyn told James. Get as many blankets as you have, and keep that baby close to her skin. The warmth will help them both. She sat back, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and relief and residual terror. She'd done it. Somehow, against all odds, she'd done it. When she finally stumbled out of the cabin hours later, Colt was waiting on the porch. He took one look at her blood-covered hands and exhausted face. "They alive?" he asked. "Yes, both of them." "Good." He handed her a canteen of water. "You did good." Evelyn drank, her hands trembling so badly water spilled down her chin. "I almost lost her, the mother. There was so much blood, I didn't know what I was doing." "But you did it anyway. What if next time I can't? What if next time someone dies because I'm not good enough?" Colt was quiet for a moment, then, "Someone's going to die eventually. That's a certainty. But look at how many you've saved. The Fletcher girl, the people from the fire, this woman and her baby. That's what matters. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it's what you've got." He gestured at the wagon. "We should head back before the snow gets worse." They rode home through a blizzard, barely able to see 3 feet ahead. Evelyn was so exhausted she swayed in the saddle, nearly falling twice. Both times, Colt's hand shot out to steady her. When they finally reached the cabin, Evelyn collapsed the moment she got inside. Colt caught her before she hit the floor, carried her to the cot, laid her down with surprising gentleness. "Sleep," he said. "Can't. Need to clean up. Need to sleep first. Everything else later." She wanted to argue, but her body had other ideas. Her eyes closed and consciousness fled. When she woke, it was dark outside and Colt was sitting at the table, cleaning his rifle by lamplight. A fire burned in the stove, warming the cabin. Someone, him, obviously, had covered her with extra blankets. "How long?" she asked, her voice rough. "About 12 hours. It's the next night." She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting. "Did anyone else come?" "Yeah, told them you were resting. They'll come back." You should eat something and go back to sleep. You're no use to anyone dead from exhaustion." He set down the rifle. "There's stew on the stove. Still warm." Evelyn forced herself to stand, to move to the table. Colt ladled stew into a bowl for her without being asked. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing. "You can't keep doing this," Colt said after a while. "Doing what?" "Running yourself into the ground every time someone needs help. You're one person. You can't save everyone." "But I have to try." "Why? What are you trying to prove?" The question hit harder than it should have. Evelyn set down her spoon. "I'm not trying to prove anything." "Liar." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're trying to prove your father wrong. Prove you're not useless. That's what this is really about." "So what if it is?" She felt her defenses rising. "Is that so terrible? It is if it gets you killed. Or if you burn yourself out so bad you can't help anyone anymore." His expression softened slightly. "You've already proved him wrong, Evelyn. Multiple times over. At some point you need to accept that and stop trying to earn something you already have. And what's that? Worth. You matter out here. To these people. To—" He stopped himself. "You matter. Stop trying to die proving it." The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd been holding tight for months. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. "Every time someone comes here desperate for help, I'm terrified I won't be enough, that I'll fail them, that they'll realize I'm just making it up as I go. Everyone's making it up as they go. That's life on the frontier." Colt poured himself coffee, the domestic gesture somehow strange coming from him. "But you're getting better, learning. That baby today? 6 months ago you couldn't have done that. You would have panicked and frozen." "I did panic." "Yeah, but you worked through it. That's the difference." He took a sip of coffee, made a face like it was too strong. You've come a long way from the girl who couldn't make biscuits without burning down the kitchen. Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. I still burn them sometimes. Only half the time now. That's progress. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, wind howled through the valley, rattling the shutters. Inside, the fire crackled and the lamplight cast warm shadows. Colt? Evelyn said eventually. Yeah? Why do you help me with all of this? You could have sent these people away, told them I'm not a real healer, but you don't. He was quiet for a long time. Because watching you help people is... He struggled for words. It's good. Seeing something good happen in this place. And because you remind me that not everyone's broken beyond fixing. You're not broken. Yes, I am. Have been for a long time. He set down his cup. But maybe that's all right. Broken things can still be useful. Before Evelyn could respond, there was a knock at the door. Colt opened it to find Mrs. Fletcher standing there with two other women, all of them carrying baskets. We heard about the Crawford baby, Mrs. Fletcher said. Thought we'd bring some supplies. Help stock your stores for winter. Behind them, more people were arriving. The Santos family with preserved food. Tom Fletcher with firewood already split and stacked. Even the ranchers who'd once mocked her came, offering dried meat and root vegetables. We know you're helping folks without asking for payment, one of them said gruffly. Figured we'd make sure you don't starve doing it. Evelyn stood in the doorway, watching this parade of gratitude, and felt tears burning her eyes. These people, these hard, practical frontier people who had nothing extra to give, were giving it anyway. Thank you, she managed. You don't have to. Yes, we do, Mrs. Fletcher interrupted. You saved my Sarah. Saved the Crawford woman and her baby. Saved half the valley from that fire. This is the least we can do. They stayed for hours, filling the cabin with warmth and noise and life. They shared news and gossip and stories. They taught Evelyn recipes and remedies passed down through generations. They treated her not like an outsider, not like the useless city girl, but like one of them. When they finally left, the cabin was overflowing with supplies, enough to last the winter twice over. See, Colt said quietly. You matter. Maybe he was right. Maybe she'd already proved everything she needed to prove. As winter deepened, Evelyn began teaching. It started small, showing Mrs. Fletcher how to properly clean and dress wounds, teaching the Santos daughters about herbs and their uses, demonstrating to a group of ranch wives how to recognize signs of infection. But word spread, and soon women were coming from all over the valley, hungry to learn. Not just medical knowledge, but everything Evelyn had been forced to learn herself. How to preserve food for long winters. How to handle tools and weapons. How to survive when help was far away. You're building something, Colt observed one afternoon, watching a dozen women gathered in the cabin while Evelyn demonstrated stitching techniques using cloth scraps. I'm just sharing what I know. It's more than that. You're making them stronger, more capable. That's dangerous for the men who like their women helpless. Evelyn looked up from her demonstration. Good. They should be worried. He almost smiled. There she is, the woman who walked through the desert bleeding and refused to quit. The comment made her realize how much had changed. 6 months ago, she'd been terrified of everything. Now she was teaching other women to be unafraid, or at least to act despite their fear. One evening in late January, a rider came through the snow at full gallop. Evelyn's heart sank. That kind of speed only meant emergency. But when the rider dismounted, it was just a boy delivering a message. Ma'am, my pa says to tell you Mary Crawford and baby Rose are doing fine. The baby's healthy as can be, and Ma said... He pulled out a carefully wrapped package. She made this for you. Inside was a quilt, beautifully stitched, each square made by a different woman from the valley. The Fletcher Square, the Santos Square, the Crawford Square. Dozens more from families Evelyn had helped. The center square had her name embroidered in careful letters, Evelyn Maddox. She stared at it. We're not... Everyone calls you Maddox, the boy said matter-of-factly. You live here with Mr. Maddox, seems right enough. After he left, Evelyn held the quilt and tried to figure out what she felt. The name shouldn't have mattered. It was just convenience, just people making assumptions. But seeing it stitched there in permanent thread made something in her chest feel tight and warm and terrifying. They think we're married, she said to Colt that night. He glanced up from the account books he was reviewing. Yeah, figured that was happening. Doesn't that bother you? Why would it? Doesn't change anything. He went back to his numbers. Unless it bothers you. Did it? Evelyn wasn't sure. Marriage had always been something done to her in her old world, a transaction, a way for her father to finally make her useful. The thought of it had terrified her. But this wasn't that. This was just people seeing two people who worked together, lived together, survived together, and assuming the logical conclusion. It doesn't bother me, she said finally. Just feels strange. You've done stranger things than let people think what they want. He closed the account book. How many people did you help this month? I don't keep count. I do. 19. 19 different people or families came here for help. That's more than most doctors see in 3 months. And you're doing it without training or payment or recognition. I get recognition. They brought supplies, made me a quilt. That's gratitude. Recognition is different. It's people seeing what you've built here and understanding what it means. He stood, moved to the window. You've changed this valley, Evelyn. Women here are tougher because you taught them to be. People survive things they wouldn't have 6 months ago. That matters. She joined him at the window, looking out at the snow-covered valley. I still fail sometimes, lost that rancher to infection, couldn't save Mrs. Chen's heart. The Morrison boy. Bad for you. I know, but look at all the ones who are still alive because of you. He turned to face her. That baby, Rose. She's going to grow up, maybe have children of her own someday. That's because you refused to give up when everyone else said it was impossible. That's what you've built. Evelyn felt the weight of it settling over her shoulders. Not crushing weight. Something else. Responsibility, maybe. Or purpose. I never wanted this, she said quietly. Never wanted to be a healer. Never wanted any of this. Neither did I. Wanted to live alone in these mountains and never see another person. Colt's expression was unreadable. Then you showed up bleeding and stubborn and completely useless at everything practical. And now I can't imagine this place without you in it. The confession hung in the air between them. Evelyn's heart was hammering. Colt, Don't. He turned away. Don't make it more than it is. We work well together. That's all. But it wasn't all. They both knew it. Somewhere between the desert walk and the medical emergencies and the long winter nights, something had shifted, changed, become something neither of them quite knew how to name. The moment passed. Colt went back to his account books. Evelyn returned to organizing her medical supplies. But the air felt different now. Charged with possibilities, neither of them was ready to speak aloud. Outside, the winter wind howled. Inside, the fire burned warm. And between two broken people trying to survive in an unforgiving world, something fragile and stubborn refused to die. Something that might have been hope. Spring came late, breaking winter's grip with reluctant warmth. The snow melted into streams that carved new paths through the valley, and the world turned green again. Evelyn stood on the cabin porch watching the transformation and realized she'd survived her first frontier winter. Not just survived, thrived in ways she never could have imagined. The teaching had grown beyond anything she'd planned. What started as a few women learning basic medical care had become something larger. They met twice a week now, sometimes more. Women came from homesteads a full day's ride away, staying overnight in makeshift camps, hungry for knowledge that might keep their families alive. Evelyn taught them everything she'd learned. Not just medicine, but survival. How to shoot straight. How to preserve food through the hottest summers. How to birth a calf, treat a sick horse, fix a broken wagon wheel. Skills she'd been forced to learn herself, now passed on to women who'd been told their whole lives they were too delicate for such things. You're building an army, Colt said one morning, watching a group of 20 women practicing rifle shooting in the meadow below the cabin. I'm teaching them to survive. Same thing out here. He leaned against the porch railing, coffee in hand. The men are getting nervous. Heard talk in town last time I went for supplies. Some of them don't like their wives learning to be independent. Too bad for them. He smiled slightly. That's what I figured you'd say. The women weren't just learning skills. They were changing. Evelyn watched them grow stronger, more confident. Women who'd been timid and uncertain now spoke up, made decisions, handled crises without falling apart. They were becoming the kind of people who could survive anything, and they were teaching each other. Mrs. Fletcher shared her knowledge of plants and herbs. The Santos women taught food preservation techniques passed down through generations. The ranch wives demonstrated animal husbandry. It was building into a network of knowledge and support that spread across the entire territory. Evelyn had never set out to create something like this. She'd just been trying to survive, to prove she wasn't the useless burden her father had claimed. But in doing so, she'd accidentally built something that mattered, something that would outlast her. The thought should have made her proud. Instead, it made her uneasy in ways she couldn't quite name. The unease crystallized into dread when Tom Fletcher came riding up in early April, his face pale with urgency. "Miss Evelyn, we need you in town. Now." "What happened?" "It's your father. He's here." The words hit like a physical blow. Evelyn's hands went cold. "What?" "Showed up this morning with some fancy lawyer type. Says he's here to collect you. Says the arrangement with Mr. Maddox is void or illegal or something. I don't know all the details, but he's making a big scene in town, demanding to know where you are." Colt appeared in the doorway behind her. "How many men did he bring?" "Just the lawyer, and the sheriff's with them, but Sheriff Monroe don't seem too happy about the whole thing." "Tell them she's not available," Colt said. "Already did. Your father says he'll wait as long as it takes. Says you're his daughter, and he has legal right to—" Tom stopped, looking uncomfortable. "To what?" Evelyn's voice came out steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "To reclaim his property. That's what he called you. His property that was stolen." The old shame tried to rise up, the old fear. But something else rose with it, something harder, angrier. "I'm going to town," Evelyn said. "Bad idea," Colt said immediately. "He's trying to provoke you. Don't give him the satisfaction." "I'm not hiding from him, not anymore." She turned to face Colt. "He's been controlling my life through fear my entire existence, making me feel small and worthless and broken. I'm done with that." "Evelyn, I'm going. You can come with me or not. Your choice." Colt studied her face for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Give me 5 minutes to saddle the horses." The ride to town felt both too long and too short. Evelyn's mind raced with everything she wanted to say, everything she'd been holding back for years. But underneath the anger was the old, familiar fear. What if he was right? What if she really was just a broken, useless thing pretending to be capable? "Whatever he says," Colt said as they approached town, "remember, it's not true. You're not the person he thinks you are anymore." "What if I am? What if this whole thing has just been an act and I'm still that scared girl he abandoned?" "Then that scared girl has one hell of an act, because she saved more lives in 6 months than most people save in a lifetime." He glanced at her. "You're allowed to be scared and strong at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive." The words settled something in her chest. Not completely. The fear was still there, probably always would be. But it felt more manageable now. Town was buzzing when they arrived. People lined the main street, watching the drama unfold. In front of the general store, Richard Carter stood with a thin man in an expensive suit who had to be the lawyer, and beside them, looking deeply uncomfortable, was Sheriff Monroe. Evelyn's father had aged in the months since she'd seen him. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes were the same, cold and calculating and utterly certain of his own righteousness. "Evelyn," he said when he saw her. Not warmly, just acknowledging her presence like she was a servant who'd kept him waiting. "Finally, we can settle this business and return home." "I am home," she said, dismounting. Her legs were shaking, but she locked her knees and stood straight. "This is where I live now." "Don't be ridiculous. You're coming back to Boston where you belong. This frontier experiment has gone on long enough." "Experiment?" The word tasted bitter. "You sold me. You took money and land in exchange for getting rid of the daughter who embarrassed you. That wasn't an experiment. That was abandonment." Her father's jaw tightened. "I provided you with an opportunity to be useful for once. You should be grateful." "Grateful? You humiliated me in front of an entire town, called me worthless and fragile and too broken to matter. You left me bleeding in the desert and never looked back. Your dramatics aside, the legal facts are simple." He gestured to the lawyer. "Mr. Harrison has reviewed the contract with Mr. Maddox. It's invalid. Contracts involving human beings as property are illegal, even in this backwards territory. Therefore, you remain under my guardianship and will return with me immediately." The lawyer stepped forward, unfolding papers. Miss Carter, your father has every legal right to— Mrs. Maddox, Evelyn interrupted. Silence fell over the street. Her father's face went dangerously red. What did you say? Mrs. Maddox, that's my legal name now. She wasn't sure where the lie came from, but it felt right, felt true in ways that transcended simple facts. Colt and I were married 3 months ago. I'm no longer under your guardianship. Colt didn't contradict her, didn't even flinch, just stepped up beside her in silent support. That's a lie, her father snarled. Another one of your pathetic attempts to— Is it? Sheriff Monroe interrupted. He was a large man, weathered by years on the frontier, and he looked at Richard Carter with open distaste. Because I'm looking at a woman who's been living here respectable-like with Mr. Maddox for months, helping folks, healing people, contributing to this community. Seems like a married woman to me. I demand proof, marriage certificate, legal documentation. This ain't Boston, Mr. Carter, the sheriff said. Out here we got different ways of doing things. A man and woman living together, working together, being recognized by the community as married, that's as legal as any paper in these parts. It was a lie. Everyone knew it was a lie, but Evelyn watched the townspeople, the same people who'd once mocked her, stepping forward in silent support. Mrs. Fletcher nodded firmly. The Santos family moved closer. Even some of the ranchers who'd bet on her failure crossed their arms and stared down her father with hostile eyes. They were choosing her, over money, over outside authority, over a wealthy Boston businessman. They were choosing the woman who'd stitched their wounds and delivered their babies and taught their wives to survive. This is absurd, her father said. Sheriff, I demand you— You ain't in a position to demand anything, Sheriff Monroe said flatly. Your daughter, Mrs. Maddox, is an adult woman living with her husband in my territory. You got no claim on her, so I suggest you climb back in whatever fancy coach brought you here and head on home. I will not be dismissed by some frontier lawman barely qualified to pull. You finished? Sheriff's hand moved to the gun at his hip. Not threatening, exactly, just reminding everyone it was there. Because I'm about done listening to a man who abandoned his daughter in the desert talk about his legal rights. Richard Carter's face went from red to purple. The lawyer whispered something urgent in his ear. For a moment, Evelyn thought her father might actually try to force the issue, to drag her back to Boston by sheer force of will like he'd done her entire life. Then his eyes met hers, and for the first time she didn't look away, didn't flinch, just stared back at the man who'd spent 26 years making her feel worthless, and let him see exactly how much she'd changed. Whatever he saw made something in his expression shift. Not softening, Richard Carter didn't do soft, but recognition maybe, of defeat. You'll regret this, he said quietly. This primitive life, these crude people, this pretense of being useful. Eventually you'll realize you've thrown away everything for nothing, and when you come crawling back, don't expect me to— I won't come back, Evelyn said. Her voice was steady now, clear. Not ever. Because you were wrong about me. I'm not weak. I'm not fragile. I'm not worthless. I never was. You just needed me to believe I was so you could feel better about yourself. How dare you? I'm not finished. She stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his eyes. You spent my whole life tearing me down because watching me fail made you feel successful. Every time I couldn't meet your impossible standards, you had proof that you were better, stronger, more valuable. But the truth is, you're just a bitter man who couldn't love his own daughter because she reminded you too much of your own failures. His hand came up. For a moment, she thought he might actually strike her. Several men in the crowd moved forward, hands on weapons, but her father just lowered his hand slowly. You'll die out here, in this wasteland, alone and forgotten, and no one will care. You're wrong. People here care. They care because I matter to them, because what I do matters. She gestured at the crowd around them. These people are my family now, the real kind, the kind that shows up when you're bleeding and scared, the kind that doesn't abandon you when you're not perfect. That's more than you ever gave me. Richard Carter stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the lawyer. We're leaving. This was a waste of time. Sir, we could pursue legal action in the territorial court. Forget it. Let her rot in this hellhole if that's what she wants. He started toward the coach, then paused, looked back at Evelyn one last time. I hope it was worth it. Throwing away everything for these people who will forget you the moment you stop being useful to them. They already know I'm not perfect, Evelyn said quietly, and they're still here. That's the difference between them and you. He left without another word. The coach pulled away, kicking up dust that settled over everything like a final punctuation mark. The moment he disappeared from view, Evelyn's legs gave out. Colt caught her before she fell, his arms solid around her waist. Easy, he murmured. You're all right. It's over. I lied, she whispered, about being married. I lied to everyone. So did I. He steadied her until she could stand on her own, and I'd do it again. Sheriff Monroe approached, his expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Maddox, you might want to make that marriage legal sooner rather than later, just in case your father decides to come back with more lawyers. We'll handle it, Colt said. The sheriff nodded and walked away. The crowd began dispersing, people returning to their business, but not before stopping to offer words of support. Mrs. Fletcher hugged Evelyn fiercely. The Santos women pressed food into her hands. Even some of the men who'd once mocked her tipped their hats respectfully. You really told him, Tom Fletcher said admiringly. Wish I could have seen his face when you called him out on all his garbage. After everyone had gone, Evelyn and Colt stood alone in the empty street. The silence felt enormous. We should talk about this, Evelyn said finally. Yeah, we should. But Colt didn't move. Just stood there looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You meant what you said about this being home? Yes, I can't imagine being anywhere else now. She took a breath. But the marriage thing. We don't have to actually... I know you value your solitude and having me around is already... Evelyn? She stopped. I meant what I said too. About doing it again. The lie. He ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable. Thing is, it didn't really feel like a lie. You've been living in my cabin, working beside me, for almost a year now. People already think we're married, and I... He stopped, struggled with the words. I don't hate the idea of it being real. Her heart was hammering. You don't? No, do you? Did she? Marriage had always been something to fear in her old life, a transaction that would give some man control over her, the way her father had controlled her. But this would be different. Colt had never tried to control her. He'd pushed her to be stronger, yes, but never to be something she wasn't. No, she said quietly. I don't hate it either. All right then. He cleared his throat, awkward in a way she'd never seen him before. We should probably make it legal, for practical reasons. Very practical. Exactly. They stood there, both of them clearly having no idea what to do next, until Colt finally just held out his hand. Evelyn took it. His palm was rough and calloused against hers, familiar from months of working together. We'll go to the courthouse tomorrow, he said. Get the papers filed. Keep it simple. Simple is good. They rode back to the cabin in silence, but it was the comfortable kind. The kind that came from understanding without needing words. When they arrived, Evelyn dismounted and looked at the rough wooden structure that had become home. It wasn't fancy, wasn't beautiful by Boston standards, but it was hers, really hers. Not because a man owned it and allowed her to live there, but because she'd earned her place here through blood and sweat and refusing to quit. That night, as she lay on her cot, the same cot she'd collapsed on that first terrible day, Evelyn thought about everything that had changed. The frightened, useless girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach didn't exist anymore. She'd been broken down and rebuilt into someone stronger, someone capable, someone who mattered. Not because she'd become perfect. She still failed sometimes, still lost patience, still burned dinner occasionally, and missed targets when shooting. But she kept going anyway, kept trying, kept learning, and that, she realized, was the real strength. Not being unbreakable, but being willing to break and then put yourself back together. Again and again and again. The wedding was nothing like what Evelyn had imagined weddings should be. No fancy church, no elaborate dress, no crowd of society people judging every detail. Just her and Colt standing in front of a territorial judge who barely looked up from his papers while declaring them legally married. You're all set, the judge said, stamping the certificate. Congratulations. Next. They walked out as husband and wife, the legal reality of it feeling both monumental and strangely anticlimactic. Well, Colt said as they stood on the courthouse steps, that's done. Yes, very romantic. He almost smiled. You want romance? You married the wrong man. Good thing I wasn't looking for romance then. But that wasn't entirely true, and they both knew it. What had grown between them over the past year wasn't romance in the traditional sense. No grand declarations, no passionate speeches, but it was real in ways those things never could be. It was built on trust earned through crisis after crisis, on respect learned through watching each other survive impossible things, on a partnership that didn't need pretty words to be valuable. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. To the outside world, nothing changed. They still worked together, still helped people who came seeking aid, still maintained their separate sleeping spaces in the cabin. But something felt different, more permanent, like they'd made a promise to keep choosing each other, day after day, and that promise mattered. The teaching network continued growing. By summer, Evelyn was training women from settlements 2 and 3 days' ride away. Some of them stayed for weeks, learning everything they could before returning home to teach others. The knowledge was spreading, creating a web of capable women across the entire territory. You've started something that's going to outlive you, Colt said one evening, watching Evelyn work with a group of students in the meadow. That's the idea, so when I'm gone, the knowledge doesn't die with me. You planning on going somewhere? No, but someday I will be gone. We all will, and I want to know that what I've built will continue. She looked at him. Is that strange? No, it's smart. Most people just live for themselves. You're living for the next generation. That matters. The words made her think about Sarah Fletcher, who was 15 now and walking with only a slight limp. About baby Rose Crawford, who was growing into a healthy, laughing child. About all the people who were alive because she'd refused to give up when things got hard. That was legacy. Not wealth or status or social position, just lives touched and changed and saved. Fall came again, bringing with it the first anniversary of Evelyn's arrival. She marked it quietly, remembering the terrified girl who'd walked through the desert bleeding and certain she would die. That girl felt like a stranger now. One afternoon in late September, Mrs. Fletcher arrived with news that made Evelyn's breath catch. There's a man in town, she said. Says he's a real doctor. Trained back east. He's looking to set up a practice in the territory. Heard there was a healer out here doing good work and wants to meet you. A real doctor. Someone with actual training and credentials. Someone who could do everything Evelyn had been fumbling through by instinct and desperation. You should go meet him, Colt said when Mrs. Fletcher had gone. Could learn a lot from someone with formal training. Or he could tell everyone I've been doing everything wrong, that I'm just a fraud pretending to know what I'm doing. You're not a fraud, you've saved lives. By luck, by stumbling through and hoping for the best. So, you think real doctors don't do the same thing sometimes? He poured coffee, handed her a cup. Go meet him. Worst case, you learn you've been doing some things wrong. Best case, you get a partner who can help carry the load. The doctor's name was Samuel Wright. He was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and hands that looked too clean for frontier work. He was setting up a small clinic in town, and when Evelyn arrived, he greeted her with genuine warmth. Mrs. Maddox, I've heard remarkable things about your work. The Fletcher girl's leg, the Crawford birth, the fire victims. Quite impressive for someone with no formal training. Evelyn braced herself for the criticism. I'm sure I've made mistakes, done things wrong. Oh, undoubtedly, we all do. He smiled. But you've also done things right, or those people would be dead. I'd like to learn from you, actually. Frontier medicine is different from what I learned in medical school. The improvisation, the use of local remedies, the way you've built a network of trained women, it's brilliant. You want to learn from me? Of course. And I hope you'll let me share what I know as well. Between us, we could really improve medical care across the entire territory. He gestured around the small clinic. I have books, instruments, supplies, access to new medical journals. And you have practical experience and the trust of the community. Together, we could do remarkable work. It felt too good to be true. But over the following weeks, Dr. Wright proved himself genuine. He consulted with Evelyn on difficult cases, taught her proper surgical techniques, showed her how to use instruments she'd only read about. And in turn, he listened to her knowledge of local plants, learned from her practical experience with frontier injuries, and treated her as an equal partner rather than an uneducated assistant. The women in her teaching network benefited most. With Dr. Wright's help, Evelyn could offer more advanced training. The network grew stronger, more knowledgeable, more capable. "You've built something extraordinary," Dr. Wright said one day as they treated a difficult case together. "These women are going to transform healthcare across the frontier, and it started with you refusing to accept that you couldn't learn." That night, Evelyn sat on the cabin porch and thought about that first terrible day when her father had called her too weak to survive, too fragile, too useless. He'd been wrong about all of it. She had survived. She'd become stronger than anyone, including herself, had believed possible. And she'd built something that would help people survive long after she was gone. The door opened behind her. Colt came out, handed her a blanket against the evening chill, and sat down beside her. "Penny for your thoughts," he said. "Just thinking about how far I've come, how different everything is now." Regret any of it? She considered the question seriously. Did she regret the pain, the fear, the humiliation of that first day, the terror of treating injuries she wasn't qualified for, the weight of the people she couldn't save? "No," she said finally. "I regret what it took to get here, but I don't regret where I ended up." "Good." He was quiet for a moment. "Your father was wrong, you know, about you being forgotten the moment you stopped being useful." "How do you know?" "Because you're more than what you do. He struggled with the words. "You're stubborn and brave and too determined for your own good. You make terrible coffee and you still can't shoot worth a damn, but you keep trying. You keep showing up. That's what people will remember, not just what you did for them, but who you are." The words settled warm in her chest. "That might be the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't get used to it. I've got a reputation for being cold and unfeeling to maintain." "Too late. I know the truth now." He almost smiled. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the valley they both called home. 2 years after Evelyn's arrival, the settlement held a harvest celebration. The entire valley came together, families from every homestead, ranchers and farmers, old-timers and newcomers. Tables were set up in the town square, loaded with food. Music played. Children ran wild. Evelyn moved through the crowd, greeting people she'd helped, women she'd trained, families who'd become her chosen family. Sarah Fletcher was there with a young man who looked at her like she hung the moon, her limp barely noticeable. Baby Rose toddled around, healthy and laughing. The burn victims from the fire showed their scars with pride. "Speech," someone called out. "Mrs. Maddox should say something." Someone. "No, I really shouldn't," Evelyn started, but people were already gathering, looking at her expectantly. She glanced at Colt, who just shrugged. "No help there." "All right," she said, standing on a bench so people could see her. "I'm not good at speeches, so I'll keep this short. 2 years ago, I came here thinking I was worthless, broken, too weak to survive. And for a while, everything I did seemed to prove that was true." She looked around at the faces watching her. "But you all taught me something important. Strength isn't about being perfect. It's not about never falling down or never being scared. It's about getting back up anyway. About trying even when you're terrified you'll fail. About helping each other survive the hard times." Mrs. Fletcher was wiping tears from her eyes. The Santos women were nodding. Even some of the rough ranchers looked moved. "I survived because you gave me chances to prove I could. And then you helped me become someone who could give those chances to others. That's what community means. That's what makes us strong." She raised her cup. "So here's to surviving together, to being broken and useful at the same time. To all of us." "To all of us," the crowd echoed, raising their own cups. The celebration continued late into the night. Evelyn danced with Colt, badly, because neither of them knew how, and laughed when they stepped on each other's feet. She held Baby Rose while Mary Crawford got food. She talked with Dr. Wright about expanding the medical training program. She existed in the moment, surrounded by people who valued her not for her perfection, but for her persistence. Later, as she and Colt rode back to the cabin under a sky full of stars, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and fear and failure, the small victories, the people saved and lost, the woman she'd become. "You all right?" Colt asked, noticing her silence. "Yeah, just thinking." "About?" "About how sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the beginning of the best thing." She looked at him. "My father selling me, leaving me in the desert. It was cruel. It was wrong. But if it hadn't happened, I'd still be in Boston, miserable and useless, believing every terrible thing he said about me. So you're saying you're grateful he abandoned you? No. I'm saying I'm grateful I survived it, that I chose to survive it. She pulled her coat tighter against the night chill. There's a difference. They reached the cabin. Home. The word felt real now in a way it never had in Boston's grand house. This rough wooden structure in the middle of nowhere was more home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Inside, Colt built up the fire while Evelyn put away her things. The routine was familiar now, comfortable. They moved around each other with practiced ease, two people who'd learned how to exist in the same space without crowding. Evelyn, Colt said as she was preparing for bed. She turned to find him standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I'm not good at this, he said, at saying what I mean, but I need you to know. He stopped, struggled. You're not just useful. To me, I mean. You're more than that. You're... She crossed the room and kissed him. It was impulsive and probably poorly timed and not at all graceful, but it was real. When they broke apart, Colt looked stunned. I was trying to say something meaningful. I know, but you were taking too long. She smiled. Besides, I already know what you meant. You do? Yes, because I feel the same way. She took his hand, felt the familiar roughness of his palm. We don't have to make it complicated. We work. That's enough. Yeah, he said softly. It is. That night, for the first time, Evelyn didn't sleep on the cot by the stove. She slept in the lean-to with Colt, curled against his warmth, listening to his heartbeat. It felt right in a way nothing ever had before. Not perfect. They were both too damaged for perfect. But real, solid, true. The years that followed brought more challenges. Harsh winters and scorching summers. Medical crises that pushed Evelyn's limits. Conflicts with people who didn't like change or women gaining independence. The weight of people she couldn't save, no matter how hard she tried. But they survived all of it, together. The teaching network grew into something almost like a school. Young women came from across the territory to train with Evelyn and Dr. Wright, learning skills that would save lives in their own communities. The web of knowledge kept spreading, kept growing, kept transforming the frontier. Evelyn never became famous, never got written up in newspapers or celebrated in distant cities. But in the territory she called home, her name meant something. It meant hope. It meant help when you needed it. It meant refusing to accept that people were too weak or too broken to matter. 5 years after her arrival, Evelyn stood on the cabin porch, expanded now, more stable, but still recognizably the same rough structure, and watched the sun set over the valley. She was 31 years old. Her hands were scarred from years of work. Her face was weathered by sun and wind. She looked nothing like the pale, fragile society girl who'd stepped off that stagecoach. She looked like someone who'd survived, who'd fought and failed and fought again, who'd built something meaningful from the ashes of humiliation. Colt came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. They stood like that, watching the light fade, comfortable in the silence. What are you thinking? He asked eventually. That my father was right about one thing. I did die out here. She leaned back against him. The person I was died, and someone better took her place. Someone stronger. Not stronger, just less afraid of being weak. She turned in his arms to face him. That's the real difference. I'm still scared sometimes, still fail, still make mistakes, but I don't let it stop me anymore. That's the definition of strength, Evelyn. Maybe it was. Strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up, about trying again even when you'd failed before, about believing you were worth the effort even when everyone else said you weren't. That night, lying in bed beside her husband, Evelyn thought about the girl she'd been. Fragile and frightened and desperate for approval. That girl had believed the cruel voices that said she was worthless, had let them define her entire existence. But that girl was gone now. In her place was a woman who knew her worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions, who understood that survival wasn't about being perfect, it was about being persistent, who had learned that the best response to being told you can't do something is to do it anyway and prove them wrong. The frontier had broken her down and rebuilt her. The process had been brutal and terrifying and painful, but it had also been necessary, because the person she'd been couldn't have survived out here. Only the person she'd become, scarred and strong and stubbornly refusing to quit, could thrive in this harsh, beautiful place. As sleep pulled her under, Evelyn's last thought was simple and true. She had never been weak at all. She'd just been surrounded by people too blind to recognize her strength. And now, finally, she could recognize it herself. That was worth everything. Every moment of pain, every failure, every terrifying crisis. Because in the end, she'd found something more valuable than her father's approval, or society's acceptance, or any other external validation. She'd found herself. The real version. The strong one. The one who'd been there all along, just waiting for a chance to prove what she could do. And that person, scarred and imperfect and absolutely refusing to give up, was someone worth being. The stars shone cold and distant above the valley. The wind whispered through the mountains. And in a rough cabin in the middle of nowhere, a woman who'd been abandoned and left for dead slept peacefully beside the man who'd learned to love her, not despite her brokenness, but because of how she'd refused to let it define her. The journey from worthless to essential hadn't been smooth or easy or anything close to perfect, but it had been real. And in the end, that was all that mattered.